Hey YouTube, in this video I'm talking about flies and the differences between them. So if you've already watched my previous video on flies, then you'd understand that flies train speed endurance, and the focus here for what you should be choosing for whether that's 10-meter flies, 30 meters, 60, 90, whatever, shouldn't be on increasing the distance. It should be dependent upon you yourself as an athlete. For example, someone who's training for the 60 or the 100 meter wouldn't need to put as much emphasis onto speed endurance training as someone who's training for the 200 or the 400. Because like I said in the previous video, speed endurance isn't about being able to hold your max speed for a certain amount of time. You need to think of it as being able to maintain your form at max speed for as long as possible. If you're doing 100 meters, that's your main event and that's what you're going to be doing for like the entire season, then there is 0 point in you doing 90-meter flies, because most likely you're going to be sprinting for 120 meters. You're going to do a really slow run up for about 30 meters, maybe more, maybe less, and then you're going to hold your max velocity for 90 meters. You're not going to reach your max velocity in a 100-meter sprint 10 meters in. It's going to happen 30, 40, 50, or there's maybe the goal here would be as late as possible. But the point is, no, that doesn't matter who you are, it's not happening at 10 meters, and thank God for that, because that would be very, very bad if it did happen 10 meters in. So doing 90-meter flies wouldn't be very smart. On the other hand, if you was a 200 or 400-meter sprinter, then doing 90-meter flies is important. Why? Because same reason why it doesn't work for 100. You're going to have to get up to speed. You need to get out the dry phase. You need to reach max velocity. Once you've reached max velocity, this might be 60 meters or 100 meters into the race, depending on what you're doing. If it's 200, 400, maybe more, maybe less. You're going to want to be able to hold that max speed for as long as possible, because the longer you can hold that speed for, the less of your race you'll be spending decelerating. And obviously, to decrease the amount of time you spend decelerating, there's a lot of different things you can do, such as be more energy efficient. So this is literally just working on your form through the dry phase, and when you're actually at max velocity, this is through getting to top speed later. This is by increasing your top speed so you can also get the top speed later, working on maintaining your form when you're at top speed, and then working on decelerating muscles and working on just being able to decelerate at a slower rate and maintain your form so that you decelerate slower when you actually do get to decelerating. But if you're running a 200 or 400, a 90-meter fly would make more sense, purely because once you've like added up the time it takes to get to max velocity and the time you're supposed to be holding max velocity for, the race in an actual race, it would still be ongoing. So same example, takes you 30 meters to get to max speed, then you're going to hold that for 90 meters. That's 120 meters. In a 200 meter, there's still 80 meters left of the race to go, and in a 400 meter, there's 280 meters of the race left to go. So it made more sense to do 90-meter flies or longer, though I've never actually heard of longer flies, and I don't even know if they'd be useful, purely because you can't really hold top speed for that long. You might think you are, but you're not actually. You're decelerating by a small margin as the race, not the race, but as the training session goes on. You're just not aware. But if you was running 100 meters now, or 60, those 60 speed endurance isn't really that big of a factor, purely because you're going to probably be hitting max speed at about 40, 50, maybe even the actual finish line. So like if that happens, lucky for you though, that's really, really good. Then for 60 meters, there's not much point in doing speed endurance training unless you're training for other stuff later on in the season, like 100. But it made more sense to do like 30 or 60-meter flies. For the 60, like I said, I don't really see much benefit to doing flies, because you're not actually going to be able to hold your max velocity for that long. Obviously, do the flies regardless, purely because you just need to get your body more used to actually sprinting at max velocity. Because if you actually look at yourself as an athlete, as a sprinter, from not just since you started your amateur or professional career, but from when you was a little kid, most likely, actually not most likely, 100%, you've spent more time at sub-maximal speeds than you have at maximal speeds. meaning your body is more used to submaximal speeds than it is maximal speeds. This isn't to say that if you can get your body used to maximal speeds, you're going to be able to hold maximal speed for as long as you can submaximal speeds. Like, I'm not going to say if your max velocity is like 20 miles per hour, if you can get used to if your body can get used to doing that, then you're going to be able to hold 20 miles per hour for like a 5k. And if you can get your top speed even higher, you can try and break the world record for that or something like that. Because obviously science doesn't work like that, physics and biology doesn't work like that, so that would never happen. But it does go to show that your body isn't actually used to sprinting as much as you might think it is. It's more used to sprinting submaximally. So you need to just get it more used to it, because whilst you wouldn't be able to get a lot of benefits in the 60 by doing flies, getting your body more used to sprinting at max velocity would have its benefits, especially in the 100, where you actually do get to max velocity and you hold it. From the 100 onwards, you're holding your max velocity. Training flies for this is obviously very important. Most likely, you can't hold your max velocity for 30 meters. So, again, speed endurance, or even maybe 10 meters. There's like variants for the flies depending on what you're trying to work on. If you're just trying to start low and get high, you want to probably start with 10-meter flies, because a lot of people might think they're able to actually hold their max velocity for long, but in reality 10 meters actually might be too much. You might not be able to hold your max velocity for that long before you start to decrease. So it'd be important to just see actually how long you can hold max velocity for roughly, and then be like, okay, I can hold it for that long, and I can sustainably handle doing these flies, so let me try and go up a bit and up the effort and see if I can make my form be more perfect whilst I'm at max velocity for longer periods of time. This is where you want to increase from 10-meter flies to 30-meter flies, or 20, then all the way up to 60. And obviously if you're doing 100, there's no need to go any more higher than about 50, 60. But if you're doing 200 and 400, you want to just keep going up and up and up. Then obviously you are going to want to cap with the flies, because there's no way you're going to be able to hold your max velocity for an entire 400-meter race, especially if you got to max speed 30 meters in. In this scenario, what you're going to end up happening is you're going to have to readjust the flies. So for 60, 100 meters, really, like, you can do like a relative burst into the fly. So like 30 meters would be enough to get to max speed, and you hold it. But for 200 and 400, what's going to end up happening is, as you increase the flies, the time you spend at max velocity, so like for example for 60 meters, you're actually going to have to also increase the amount of time, or not amount of time, but distance travel before you actually get to max velocity, because you want to be more energy efficient, because you have to try and simulate actual training. I mean, not actual training, actual sprinting when you're training. And if he's running a 200, you wouldn't just get all the way up to max velocity, or a 4, especially not a 400. You want to get all the way up to max velocity as early as possible, and then try and finish the race. If you was racing like people who were like 2 years, I mean, this is when you're like on the age of 20, 2 years younger than you, something like that, you have a lot more muscles, really efficient and everything, then sure, you could do that. Though it's not the most efficient and the most smartest way to do a 400-meter race, but you could try. You could do it, you probably win. But if you was going up against people that are your age or your level of skill, and you're not under the age of 20, then the strategy, not probably, is the chance of it working, they're really low. So you'd have to try and make your flies quite similar to your race plan. And in this case, obviously you're not going to be able to float, because floating would basically be against the whole premise of the flies. Though you can slightly float, but you don't want to be floating before you get to max velocity. If you was to float at all, you want to float once you're at max velocity, but we don't want to be floating when we're doing the flies. So we're going to have to do the entire race plan, but without the blocks and without the floating. That's it. So for 200, if you was to get to max velocity at like, let's say 60 meters or 70, then you want to have that amount of time, maybe even more, of just build up into it. So if you're running a 60 meter, you're doing 60 meter flies, you'd have maybe 80 meters of just gradual build up, or a walk-in run towards max velocity. So that would mean you're doing 60 meters, but 140 meters in total. Now the numbers are starting to get closer and closer to an actual race. Now we've gone from, with the original 30 meters of the, let's use the 90 meter flies. We've gone with the original 90 meter flies, like 80 meters build up. So with them now, anyway, we've gone from 120 meters to 170 meters. Just looking at the difference, you can already see that the build up with a more simulated to an actual 200-meter race plan actually gets you through more of the race. And now it actually makes more sense to be doing these flies in this format, because you're not going to get to max velocity at 30 meters, because you're going to be wasting a lot of energy getting that fast compared to just doing a gradual build up into top speed through a much longer start before you get to max velocity. Same thing with the 400, because there's no way anyone sane would ever run a 400 meter and get to max velocity at 30 meters, because at the end of the day, you're going to be winning at the first 200, and you're going to be happy, but you're going to be crying when you get to the finish line. Every single time you're going to be crying. If you like my video, like the video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.